organisms like an alligator, they have a nictitating membrane that covers their eye, and it's translucent, so when they're underwater, they have built-in goggles.
How come we can't have that?
I would love to have that. It would be awesome. I mean, we have it. It just isn't
Michael
functional.
Phelps.
All right, the next question goes to Shay. What is embryological evidence?
It's where like the embryos of different species look the same at like conception, but as they grow bigger, they're slightly the same, but just not.
Okay, very good. So, embryos are another piece of evidence that show us how we are related. As Shay started to say, when they're first growing in uterus, they look very similar, and then over time they do change. Organisms that are more similar, they're closer together than in the past, then they look similar, okay? Whereas if you we look very much like a fish when we first start out, and then we change a bit, but a fish and say a salamander, throughout their gestation, they look very much the same, showing that a fish and salamander are more close related in the past than we are with a fish or a salamander. Okay, but we look very much like a cow all the way through. Okay? It shows our relationship to other organisms. All right, very good. So I would like you to just take 1 second, because we talked about 3 vocabulary terms: homologous, vestigial, and embryological evidence. Talk at your table of how those are pieces of evidence for evolution. Talk amongst yourselves.
So this style structure, that's just something that you don't use. Yeah. And then the homologous structure, so that's part of this.
They look the same. But in my CPR, it says different species are related because blank, blank, blank. And like it just shows that, like almost all of them show we come from a common ancestor, except for vestigial.
Very
Because vestigial
good.
is just stuff we don't
What was the
need.
third word?
Embryological. Okay, good question. How do these 3 things help explain our
Embryos
differences?
and explains unity and diversity.
Yes, so we have common ancestry, so that's the unity, what makes them different over time.
It shows how we
But what mechanism makes them different over time? Which comes from natural selection, okay? So that's the mechanism of how things become different over time, okay? All right, we will wrap that up. So our options for today are as follows. That's not the right bell ringer. I gotta find your class's bell ringer. Okay, option 1. If you've received a small post-it from me, we are going to have a small group workshop on natural selection at the back benches. I've kind of running out of room because we're making ecosystems, but we'll figure it out when we get back there. If you are still on explaining adaptations, please, today, you should be crossing this out and getting it done. It's not going to work, is it? There we go. Okay? This, if you're here, your goal should be finishing this for sure today. Some of you are here. I have 2 of you already working on the paper. Again, the longer you have to work on the paper, the better you're going to get a grade. Oh, good question. I did make the due date. The paper, all of your activities need to be done by Monday. Okay? The paper will be due on the 28th on Wednesday. And then the reflection on the 29th. The reflection, remember, they're easy peasy.
The paper's due on the 28th?
Paper's due on the 28th. No, your AHA thesis paper.
It's for
AHA. It's AHA thesis paper, like you finally get it. AHA, I get it. Okay, so those of you who got the sticky note, please follow me back to the back. We're going to talk about natural selection.
What if I'm on evidence?
I have a really quick question that was
I will answer your question as I make it back there. Yes, you may go to the bathroom. Take a pass. Yeah.
Can I go get a charger?
Yes. Make sure you have collateral.
Yeah.
What about the student that?
Oh, I didn't get her. I'm going to talk to her.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to the very back.
Okay, so the rest of you will be working
I have to go back there
for natural selection.
But
I need to help you understand natural selection better. You're rolling the test, which tells me that you don't.
see, it's because what got me confused. I'm gonna tell you what got me confused, miss.
Okay, you didn't fail, dude. You didn't get your level 4, but you had like 100% until your level 4.
Excuse me, good, sorry.
So I would use this as evidence. It looks stuck to you.
Because it's my deck.
A little bit.
Hold on, you said these traits are adaptation.
And then explain an adaptation.
Oh, so
So your claim would be traits are adaptation, and then you explain it with evidence.
I thought that's what my claim.
Well, yeah.
I just died. So could I say, no, these traits are adaptation,
Yeah.
like camouflage.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I understand.
I just didn't get
Yes.
the first two because it was like talking about how like the space is bigger. So I thought like the neck.
I know. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hand you back your assessment. I just want you to take a few minutes to go over it. I have written feedback on each of yours, and then we will go from there. Okay, so if you scored below a 3, that tells me that you're struggling still with standard. Madison, I feel like because you've been gone. Sam, and finally Victor. Okay. Hey. So go over that, read through my feedback that I gave you. And I just want to point out what the standard is. So what I'm asking you guys to do, and that's really the level 4. Well, you could have said it in the level 3 as well, is to construct an explanation based on evidence for how natural selection leads to adaptations of population. So how does natural selection lead to adaptations of population? Okay, so just shout out to me. What did you guys struggle with the most?
Understanding the question.
Understanding the question. Exactly. I figured that was one big hang-up, okay? Anything else? No? There was one other thing I saw too, that people would say that the girl was trying to adapt, and that wasn't the right way about it, okay? So, which questions, Victor, did you struggle with understanding?
These two.
The first 2?
Yeah, because like it said something about having with higher openings in each other fence. And I thought it meant like the opening of the hole in the neck of that. That's what I thought, but
Yeah, so what did you put for number 1?
I didn't answer it because
Oh.
I forgot, I guess.
Okay. So yes, so when I was explaining it yesterday, I even got that one wrong. And I had to go back and reread it. And that's, both Shay and Logan pointed that out to me. And so I was like, oh man, yeah. That one was a bit tricky to understand what they were asking, but basically they were asking if they're tall and that wide opening on the short of the tortoise, that would allow them to be able to really be able to get even higher plants above the ground. Even though they're short, that neck opening allowed them to get higher plants, okay? So number two, my strategy, I had you guys write in your notebook the 4 rules of natural selection, and the A through D are the 4 rules of natural selection. So I just crossed all of those out. And the only thing that doesn't work is that individuals you can't just have one individual adapt and then all of a sudden evolution occurs. In the case of what we talked about with the girl, what is adapting? What?
The bacteria.
The bacteria. Okay, so you would have started with one bacteria having a mutation that was then passed on to generation, but over time, it's the entire population that is evolving, not one individual, okay? And most of you did pretty good on number 3. Okay, so number 3, so understanding that, and okay, let me ask you this, Garrett, was it understanding the question in this case?
Mostly, yeah, because it didn't make sense out of it.
Yeah, and I'm okay with when you guys are taking a test, if you say, hey, I don't really understand what this is saying, can you please clarify? I'm okay with that. One thing that we do have to think about is this was an ACT question. I pulled it off ACT. So understanding that on this question, all of the answers that you need are actually there to get it right. It's doing what Garrett's talking about, is understanding the question. That's the hard part. That's how ACT is tripping you up, is actually trying to understand what the question is asking, okay?
So what would 3 be?
Okay, so 3, so let's walk through it. So if you look at Roman numeral number 1, the original population is that dotted line, and the population after pollution, you can see, is shifting toward the light colored beetle. Whereas Roman numeral number 2, the original population is a normal distribution like we've seen, and that's disruptive, where something selected for the extremes. They selected for the light and the dark. Okay, and then if we look at Roman numeral number 3, that's stabilization, where it just would stay the same. Roman numeral number 4, the original population is there in the center, but then it shifts its directional towards the dark. So if you can imagine all the trees become polluted, pollution is like dark particulates, right? So the trees become dark. So what beetle is going to survive better? The dark ones, because the light ones are going to be eaten by predators. So that graph is showing it's a shift towards the dark. And so if you look at D, the coloration of population shifted toward more dark colored beetles, as in diagram number 4. The light colored beetles were found more easily by predators than were the dark colored beetles. Okay?
So the answer is D then?
The answer is D. Okay? Alright, so the next question's on 3. Really, it's using this graph to describe what was happening to the girl. It's not the same girl, just so you know, not the same girl. Okay, she can't be a girl from 1925 to 1965. When I very first did this problem, I was like, whoa, I wonder if my kids are confused that it's the same girl. But basically, 1925, penicillin had been discovered, but it hadn't been produced massively, right? So not everybody was getting penicillin. So it makes sense for number 5 that in 1925 she dies because she didn't have penicillin. They didn't even talk about giving her an injection in that scenario, right? And then 1945, they give her an injection, and that was the penicillin. And at that time, if you look at the graph, so I drew a little line from 1945 and then up over. At that time, in 1945, there was only 10% of the bacteria population was resistant to the antibiotics. So she had a bacteria that was not resistant. So it cured her, okay, and she lived. But in 1965, what is the percentage of, what do we have of resistant bacteria now?
75-ish.
Like 75-ish. So there's a high percentage that she has the bacteria who won't be killed. They're resistant. That's what resistant means, is they won't be killed by the bacteria.
So that's one thing I didn't understand.
Okay.
I didn't understand the graph either.
Okay, so that's one thing that noting for me as a teacher, I need to help you guys better with graphs. Because back to ACT, most of the science questions, that's what they look like, is just trying to break that down, right? Okay, so then if we flip to the back, so what is the evolutionary change?
Where it changes in plastic,
Of what organism?
like bacteria.
Bacteria. So at one point in time, the bacteria mutated, and there was maybe even one individual that didn't die. But bacteria reproduce at such a fast rate that they lived. And so then you can see from the graph, it grew exponentially.